You know the day destroys the night, night divides the day. Try to run, try to hide, break on through to the other side. Break on through to the other side. Break on through to the other side.
God bless America. Welcome to The Ranch, everybody. The podcast that explores the people and happenings of Dry Creek Ranch, Eagle, and the greater Boise area. Quick shout out to Joe Mama's Breakfast Eatery. Joe Mama's is amazing. It's located on 55. It is, it's kind of legendary. I think most people who've lived here for some time have tried it and love it. It's an incredible value, which I find when I go with my kids. You get the short stack of pancakes that are like easily 1.5 feet in diameter. And there are two of them, and I think it's only like $8 or $10. The kids love it. My wife and I also really enjoy it. Really good food, super value. I highly recommend if you haven't checked it out. Joe Mama's Breakfast Eatery. Again, it's down 55, about 15 minutes-ish, maybe a little bit longer from DCR, but totally worth the drive. So check it out. My guests today are two dudes that really kind of changed my perspective on friendship and commitment. The story is really hard to understand in 10 seconds, so I'm not even going to try to throw it out there. But I will tell you that it is something that you would hear out of likely like a Hollywood movie. It's just one of those things. It involves vets from World War II, an enormous commitment to each other, living their lives in that fashion up until the days they died, and then seeing that tradition get passed on. And hearing this from the horse's mouth was really... Man, it's wild. It's pretty cool. Payette Brewery has gone on to actually make a beer in honor of this. I highly recommend you check out the beer, and I hope you enjoy the episode as well. So, without further ado, the men, the myth, the legends, Geeg and Ahab. Do you remember the scene from Pulp Fiction where that real serious actor shows up at Bruce Willis's childhood home, and he's like, "Hey, sport." He comes into the room and the mom's like, "There's somebody here to see you." And he goes into the long story about how his dad, who was a POW, had this watch that he had to pass down to him. Mm-hmm. And he's like, he hit it the only where he could, in his ass. And then goes in to talking about how his dad died from like dysentery or something. And so he had to hide it in his ass for like a decade or something until they got released. And now it's yours. And they passed it to like childhood Bruce Willis, right? This is like his flashback of why he had to go back to get the watch after he killed the guy in the boxing match. But when I heard your story about Ahab here, I was kind of like, is this a pain in the ass or not? But I don't think it seems to be a pain in the ass for you.
So it's not. I mean, don't get me wrong. He's a
Thank you for coming, by the way.
No thanks needed. Thanks for having me. So he is a burden, but it's the way I carry it, right? Everybody has a burden or multiple, or it might not be a physical weight. It might be, there's all kinds of burdens. But again, it's just how you carry it. You have to choose to carry it. You have to make the excuses to carry it, right? So it's one of those things where, like I said, everybody has a burden, but this one, they sort of threw it upon me, but I was sort of groomed for this role for a long time without really understanding that I was. Like, they just kept feeding me the breadcrumbs, leading me to what they planned, my grandfather and his war buddies, which I'm sure we'll get into.
Yeah, so let's do this. I heard the abbreviated version of this, and I was sold right out of the blocks when I saw your Instagram said, hoping for a cameo in Goonies 2. I was like, this is the guy. This is
and I think they've already canceled Goonies 2, or it's got stalled or something.
They should. They absolutely should. There's actually the guy who, speaking of old classics, the guy who was Ralphie in The Christmas Story, Boy and His BB Gun, he actually lives in the Boise area, and I have a connection to him through a friend. Yeah. I'm going to try to get him on. But yeah, they're definitely, Sean Austin is not coming back.
So
was Sean Austin that? He was Samwise, but he was in Goonies, right?
Yeah, he's from Goonies.
Yeah, I've lost my mind there for a second. So look, give me the full, you narrate story. I'm just going to enjoy this beverage because I want to hear in detail how you came to be carrying around this 45-pound Ahab that's going on 90 years? 90 years old?
It's 80 years this year with our families being the caretaker, essentially. So
But how old was it when they got it?
No idea.
So it's like 80 to 100 years old, most
right.
likely.
We've known it. We've had him for 80, but obviously he's at least 80 years in one day. But it's probably, old. It's definitely older. Yeah.
Okay, so take me back 80 years ago.
Sure. So 80 years ago, it was July 18th, 1943. My grandfather was drafted into the Navy, and it was the night before they were in a pub, night before everybody was getting shipped off. So it's a bunch of, not officers, but a bunch of
Enlisted
people in
men.
the service. And it's the night before they're leaving. They're all sitting there. They all have a drink in their hand, but they're just drinking real quiet. There's just that awkwardness. Everybody knows some people in this room aren't going to be in this room when the tour is over, right? They all know this is the last time my feet are going to be on soil in our country. So to break that tension, to relieve it, some of the officers start telling their units and everything about how there's this prank going on. And it's not just, I think it was in the Air Force, the Navy. I'm sure every branch had their version. But to distract them, they're like, well, other ships are going around town and commandeering something and making a stowaway on the ship, whether it's assigned to a business or, think Pink Flamingo. I know you can see Ahab here. And the idea was to take it and then make a scrapbook of the tour. So when you got back, a year and a half, 2 years, whatever it was, you would put the lawn gnome, whatever it was, and the scrapbook on the lawn, knock on the door, hide in the bushes. And the once very sad parents, because something was commandeered from them, would be very happy because they'd open the book and say, hey, Mom and Dad, you never took me anywhere, so I decided to enlist and see the world. And then you'd have this coffee table scrapbook with, plastered with cargo stickers, little stories, poems, notes, whatever, letters home. And so they're like, oh, this is awesome. It gave them something to focus on that evening. It distracted them from the next day. And that was the goal of the officers that night. So my grandfather and his soon-to-be, Naval War comrades, they all had drinks and they, cheersed and said, we're going to do this tonight. And fast forward 2 years, they were all safely home back in that port town. And they're, all celebrating on the dock. All right, let's get Ahab back to where he's from. And they were all looking at each other. And, slowly they started to realize the other guy was supposed to remember where that was, right? Plus, I'm not going to lie, I'm sure they were quite inebriated 2 years ago, middle of the night. And then all of a sudden you're there during the day, you're not from there. And you're searching around this town trying to remember this vague memory that 2 years later, you definitely were not thinking about that while you were out on a ship or thinking, you could be attacked at any second. And they realized they couldn't find the place. They took 4 days, couldn't find the place. So instead of giving up on...
They spent 4 days. They're like, listen, guys, we got to get drunk again. Midnight, right. Let's wander around and use our spidey senses.
Yeah. And they might have big fished that every time, They told that story for a long time, so they could have taken 10 minutes for all I know. And so instead of just giving up on that prank that they started and chalking it up as a failure, which it was, they used that as a chance to start a different tradition. And they all got together within the next year and a half and acquired 300 acres in Medusa, New York, in the Catskills. So they had this farmhouse and a bunch of acreage, and every year on that day, July 18th, they would get back together, and as they got older, had kids, and those kids had kids and things, but it was all about surrounded by this card game that they used to play. So they'd have the man cave and the barn type of thing, and they'd play a game of cards and all throw in about $1,000, we'll say. I'm sure it evolved as it went on. But you didn't win the pot if you won the game. You won the destination for Ahab. And the next morning, all the families were still there, me included, and they would all be gone, suitcase packed by the door. And so all the families would hang out for the rest of the week, and they would, who knows where they went, type of thing. But it was just this camaraderie piece. It kept them staying friends. It was always the excuse to bring Ahab somewhere, not like, oh, we have to get back together, because we all don't see friends, whether they're from high school, college, whatever group you were a part of, right? Like every year or every time you see one of them, it's a little longer before you see them again. And we all have that pattern, even I do. But growing up, I noticed them, this was something, it just, no matter what, every year they were there. And I grew up thinking that that's how friendships worked. Like everybody committed and they were serious about it and they would get back together. And so as I grew up, there was 34 of us in those, between my grandfather and his war buddies, who I just thought were my great uncles, because I just grew up with all these families. And as I got older, out of all the kids, believe it or not, I was born in July and on the 18th. So we're going to this farmhouse, and I think it's a birthday party for me as a kid, because I got presents every year when we went there. I was the only one around the time. And I slowly realized that this whole event was about a statue, right? About a lawn gnome. But by 10 years old, I ended up starting to go to these card games. I used to go to bed early on my birthday and then wake up late and stumble out to the barn, essentially. And they would let me fetch them beers and things like that. And for the next 9 years, I would do that. And then when I was 19, just as they were when they were drafted, they passed Ahab on to me, essentially. Instead of going on that trip the next morning, I went out to clean up the barn after them, and they were all still there. And they essentially handed me the pot from the game and said, go wake up your friends, put Ahab in the car, and start driving. So that was my rite of passage at 19, was to do what they had done when they were 19, essentially, like accidentally acquire something that wasn't mine and do something better with it. Was something that started as a prank, which started as a bad deed, right? And every year since then, it's just, we keep thinking of things to do and they just keep coming to fruition. It's definitely not that easy, but it's just, I'm through literally carrying a lawn gnome around for the last 21 years. I've had so many doors open for me, or just gotten behind so much red tape, because it's not about me doing it, it's about him doing it.
God, man, there are so many beautiful and just heart-wrenching aspects of what it's like unbelievably beautiful that they put you in charge of it. Horrible for you to realize at some point that they weren't partying for you. It was the wood thing, right? Like, amazing to hear that there's a sense of that you were raised with a sense of friendship that they had obviously forged through war. But I can only imagine what the experience was when you realized most people didn't share that definition of friendship, right? Especially the friends that you think you're going to be close with. Like everybody, it's like, oh, it's my best friend. When you're in elementary school, you have like 20 best friends. Right. And then, middle school, you have 5. High school, you have 2. Yeah. And then you realize, like, I better find a wife or somebody, because those people sucked. Yeah. But it seems that you really only, like, friendship is a hard thing in general. And I find it to be more so as I get older. And the people I've looked at kind of in recent years, adult men who are, in their late 50s or 60s or 70s, if they don't have something that's really deliberately pulling them together with somebody else, they're almost completely by themselves. Like, you have professional friends, like colleagues, right? But they're like, oh, my friend at work. When's the last time you guys hung out? Right. Well, there was that Christmas party. It's like, that doesn't count. Right. Doesn't count as hanging out. And I think that's a real crisis for men as they get older. I think women in general, like my grandmother, perfect example, and my mom and other older women I know, they have bridge groups and they have, social groups, and, it's not uncommon to see women where I was living previously, hanging out at coffee shops and stuff. And it was great. It's like they drop off kids, they go to the coffee shop, connect with each other. You never see guys doing that. No. And for me, I've realized that it was a real problem when COVID hit and I couldn't go to my jiu-jitsu anymore, because that's what I do. That was my jam. That's where my people were. And I didn't realize how impactful that was. Mm-hmm. It was like, wait, in the absence of these guys, I don't really have friends, right? And these people I deeply care about. And then to understand that it's like, oh no, this is what most people go through. Like, you could have some dudes you go drink with, but they're not like real deep friends that you're deeply connected with. And so I don't know what that transition was like for you, but to have this initial understanding of what friendship was that's just so unique had to be kind of like a wake-up call when you realize, like, oh, this is not it. Most people aren't going to share this with me.
Yeah, and up until recently, I'm finding it out more recently. Like, and it's not no fault of one person or the other, but even the core group that
Pull this bad boy a little bit.
Sure.
Yeah.
Even the core group that sort of started this with me, like a few high school friends, college roommate, things like that.
Sure.
We're just finding it's harder and harder to get together, and it's like I said, it's at no fault of each other, or we're just, people get caught up with families or work or whatever it is, but it's making that excuse to get together, just saying, look, no matter what, at least once a year, we got to put something on the calendar. And like you just said, I grew up sort of just with blinders on, thinking this is how everybody acted, but it took me a long time to sort of think about the past and why this worked. And it was between the camaraderie of something really bad, like a world war, that made everybody stick together. But then it was also, at first, I think they honestly felt bad that they commandeered something with a plan to bring it back, and then they couldn't.
And they screwed that one
right?
up.
So they wanted to make, like, everybody's made mistakes. It's how you use that experience to evolve the next experiences, right? So it's what they did afterwards. And even when they passed it on to me, I'd been watching them. I'd been around the card table fetching them beers and things, but I listened to those stories and how they evolved. And, even as the more you tell a story, the better it gets, right? And I think of myself as a storyteller, after 2 days driving 16, 17 hours each day, I don't feel like I'm going to be the best storyteller tonight, but it's one of those things where it's just the more you talk about it, or the more you just get to not rehearse, but refresh it in your brain, the more I make connections and connect the dots to some past experience that is, it's like, oh, that's really where that came from, or that's why they did that, and things
Right.
like that. And what you said about, if you don't have those groups, or you don't have something to do, you're like, wait a second, this is a real issue. And just to get the horrible part out of the way, so when they passed him on to me, within the next year, 9-10 months, all of those men they passed.
No.
So, and I always joke that it's like they retired from their actual, like, the thing that kept them going. It's like when you enter retirement without a plan type of thing, and you're like, wait, what do I do in my life? And you just, disappear.
Just fade away, yeah.
So I say that I'm not going to pass him on until
You're good and ready.
Right. But I mean, I've made a retirement plan for Ahab when I physically can't carry him and things, and we've already started it just by chance. It just sort of happened. So we're getting a head start on it. I'm sure we'll get into it. But yeah, it was crazy. So they gave me, I heard the stories and how they interacted, but they gave me Ahab and just told me to just drive. You'll sort of figure it out. Right. And I thought, I was all excited to come back to that card table the next year and actually have something to say instead of just being a listener for once. And there wasn't a card table anymore. So it was just one of those things where they gave me a little bit of guidance on what to do, but I had no idea what to do with him. And just by trial and error, meeting, one stranger at a time until it's turned into thousands and thousands of people, it's just realizing that people want to interact with each other. They just need an excuse to do it. And this is a bright yellow beacon to give everybody permission to come and talk to me, to ask about it. And then it starts small talk, which turns into larger conversations, and strangers turn into friends, and friends turn into family. And it made me realize that, there is family in strangers. One of those sort of like if then or therefore statements, like if there's, friendship in strangers, and there's family and friendship,
right.
Then there's family and strangers.
Right.
And even this morning, we were talking about this before we got on, but I was in Twin Falls, just in a diner, and it was sensory overload, because I just spent the last 34 hours in a car by myself, and then all of a sudden we had a couple dozen people, a couple at a time, but it slowly grew into this one, harmonious sort of hangout with everybody in the morning.
Massive humanity.
But it was just like we were talking about. It was crazy. First, it was just this amazing couple that was sitting next to me, and then it just happened to be Wednesday mornings is with the veterans happen to go into the diner and have their like weekly hangout. And one of them was for World War II. So when I brought up the LST-84, which was the tank landing craft that my grandfather was on and where Ahab spent most of his time, he didn't know exactly about the boat, but I didn't have to explain that was what kind of boat it was, or it was just an interesting conversation because to be honest, there's not very many people left that were in World War II. You have to be in your upper 90s, I'm pretty sure at this point, right? Give or take when you joined. So it's just it was interesting to see, because when I tell the story to people that have been in the service, they understand it on a completely different level than most people that just sort of hear it, and that it is a little emotional to about it, but they really get it because whether they've lost people or not, whether it was then or later, it's just they understand that camaraderie piece. Like you could have played sports in high school and had camaraderie, or university, or been on in clubs like jiu-jitsu, like you were talking about. But once those things don't, like for one reason or another, you transition out. There's no lifelong hobbies. We have all these hobbies until until you give them up. It's easy in high school and maybe college or things, but slowly those things disappear. And if you don't keep up on them yourself, then you don't realize how everybody's sort of doing their own thing, and there's a lot of alone time, right?
Yeah. And hobbies, I think to keep a hobby going, you have to, very much like a friendship, it can't be a hobby for a hobby's sake, right? Like the hobby has to check boxes that are hard to replace or irreplaceable. And the more of them you check, the more valuable the hobby. It's like, for jiu-jitsu, for instance, you get community, you get mastery, you get this technical and kind of intellectual pursuit, you get physical health, you get, oh my goodness, excuse me, my God, you get all kinds of things like that. And like one of the things that's interesting to me about friendship is kind of like a hobby. Friendship for friendship's sake in my life has almost never lasted, because you might get along with somebody, but you're saying from stranger to friend, friend to family. Okay. To make that transition, even from like, okay, friend to really good friend, takes something, right? Like it takes an event, and it can't just be that we get along.
Right. That
can't be the barometer of like a genuine friendship. Oh, we get along. Okay. Well, what happens when you don't get along? And if it's a friendship for friendship's sake, you're kind of like, well, I was just friends with him. It's not like I gotta like hang out with this guy again. Like if there's nothing else there, if it's not like he's a confidant, right? Or he understands an aspect of my life that other people don't, or I'm tied to him because as much of a pain in the ass as he is, he's been there with me through this stuff, right? And for me, I have friends in jiu-jitsu that I have been really mad at in previous experiences and exchanges. I have a couple friends, this guy Jerry and this guy Kevin. They're great. Kevin's this, ex-wrestler. He's about 170 pounds. He's a ginger. He's just this ball of insanity, right? And Jerry is this hulk of a man at like 210 pounds. He's a senior partner at this accounting, international accounting firm. They're both really good jiu-jitsu, but Kev gets fiery because he's a ginger. And Jerry, is also a monster. And one practice, they're we're fighting with each other, and you're getting choked, you're getting armbarred, and things get really heated. And one time, literally, Kevin and Jerry almost come to blows, and Jerry almost throws Kevin through a full wall window, right? And that was like the peak of their tension. But it was because they each checked multiple boxes for each other that they were able to like calm it back down, realize that they cared for each other, and they were drawn back to each other, because it's like, what are you going to do? Never talk to Jerry again?
Right.
Like, he's going to be at training tomorrow. Like, you're going to have to talk to him. And you want to talk to him because you guys are in it together. Like, you're going through this thing. And even in that experience, like, you have this thing that's super intense with each other. It's like, you get past it. There's no reason, there's no practical way or even reason for you to stop being friends. And so when you're talking about these guys getting back together, it's like, this is that reason. It's like, I can't imagine that each one of the guys really always got along with you. Like, they just got thrown in together.
Oh, no, yeah.
Right? They don't always get along together. And you'd be kidding yourself if, like, the kids and then grandkids always, but it was like, that was the thing that brought you back. And I think at the core of it, that's how you build a community. You have a really substantial unifying motivation that transcends or surpasses or overpowers the annoyance that we are all inherently going to have with each other. And in the absence of that, you fracture, right? Which is, I think, a big problem with a lot of the communities today. It's like, we're all kind of siloed off and we don't really have, like, we don't check boxes for each other. Nobody needs to rely on anyone. Right? Like, there is no, hey, can I borrow a cup of sugar? It's like, well, I'll just Instacart it. Like, we're systematically reducing the number of things we actually need other people for.
Exactly.
And as you do that, we become less human to each other, right? You reduce the humanity. You take away all of my capacity to actually do you a kindness, right? I'm not looking at you to do me a kindness. I'm sure as hell not talking about any of my problems, right? And all of a sudden, we're just strangers living right next to each other.
Yeah, I mean, there was a few things you hit on that are right on. It was, everybody thinks friendship's supposed to be, okay, we have a perfect relationship, and soon as you hit some kind of hurdle, you just stop talking. Like, oh, we had a hiccup, and okay, that's it. We can't work together. We can't have dinner whenever we get together, things like that. And it's not, also, like you said, in that older generation, most of them were old Italian men. Like, most of the families were Italian. I grew up, you weren't talking in the same room. You were screaming from other sides of the house and things like that. But they, I mean, at one point, especially that card game night, they knew how to get under each other's skin to try to, they're all, they all were part of the Navy. My grandfather was he was drafted, but he chose the Navy because he always wanted to be a pirate, which is where the piracy really comes from, with Ahab wanting to be a pirate, with why I went to school for marine biology. I taught sailing at summer camps. I was a raft guide for a decade, like all places where if I dressed like a pirate, nobody would really question it, type of thing. And not that I'm in full pirate garb all the time or anything, more modern day piracy. But they all got back together no matter what. They all had this ownership over a place and stewardship over that farmhouse and the land, where they all knew they had to go back one way or another. Some years were rougher than others, but they always showed up.
Right.
And that's something we really, like you said, you can't, it's almost like you can't count on as many people anymore. And I'm sure there's pockets where it works or it doesn't, but it's also we're not down the street from the people we grew up with anymore, right? You're halfway across the country or things. Right. So it's real easy not to pick up the phone or just like their crap on social media, but not actually be talking.
Man, the like Diet Coke, like you're starving to death and you get this Diet Coke and they're like, this will be good for you. And you're like, oh, it tastes good. Like, it seems good. It's not going to sustain you. Like, social media is not doing anything for, well, whatever. We don't have to,
let's not go down there.
The other thing that's very interesting is the lesser favorable aspects of keeping friends in large groups is, if you know that you can get somebody kind of like excommunicated if you dislike them, even if you wouldn't do it, if there's that kind of like looming possibility, you may become a worse person or try to like recruit people to your side, or you get in an argument and you start calling around like, can you believe he did that?
Right. You're trying to change the narrative.
Yeah, you're trying to change the narrative. Yeah. But if people have a sentiment, they're like, listen, you're going to have to work this shit out with him because he's coming next year. And yeah, I could even say that he was a dick about it. Like, that's fine. And if you want me to call him and tell him he was a dick, maybe I will, maybe I won't. But like, he's coming next year. There's no world when like, Steve is not showing up. So like, you're going to need to work this shit out. And there's a there's this a great book called Born to Run. I don't know if you've read it, but it's about how human beings, like, we're all designed to run. We can thermoregulate, so we can sweat. We can run at like 105 degrees, and maybe you run slower, but you're going to run. Your dog will die after 2 miles. Like, he just can't regulate. Like, horses can thermoregulate and humans can thermoregulate. We also can run for very, very long distances. If you give yourself 6 months, you can probably run 30 to 40 miles at a gait. Like, that's it. Just trotting down the street. Don't have to run fast, but you can actually run down wild game. So there are recorded instances of Bushmen in Africa literally chasing down a gazelle over the period of 5 or 6 hours, to the point where the gazelle collapses because it didn't get a chance to rest under a tree. And the human being, the Bushman, just kind of keeps trotting along and just like pours a little water over himself. Gazelle obviously can't carry water. And then he just walks up and like stabs this thing in the neck. And anyway, so the point is that there's in that book, he goes and interviews this Native American tribe, native tribe in Mexico. They're not Native American. They're Tarahumara, I believe their names are. They live in these very, very small groups. Okay, it's like 100 people. And it gets very intense. Now, mind you, they do not exist outside of this group. It's not like half of them go to town and half of them come back. Like, they live in these little huts in like desert Mexico, and they run like the wind. That's the thing. Every year they get together, they have this great social event the night before, and then they all march to the line for like a 24-hour race. And they're like the best runners in the world, right? Hence Born to Run. But the social event the night before is literally like the purge. Yeah. That it's very closed off. But the one guy that the author ends up interviewing that was invited to one of these things, he somehow worked his way into the community. He's like, I literally thought 3 times in 10 minutes I was going to get murdered and married at the same time. Because like, the people that had been eyeing each other, but they were spouses with somebody else, like end up in the bushes together. And then like people that are pissed at each other, like have it out, and they all show up the next day, bushy-eyed, hammered. They're like hung over to hell, having, kind of let out the steam, but showing up at this thing. And then they have this incredible, incredible race. That's like the longest race in the world that anybody has ever recorded. And it's that kind of recognition that we have to get back on the same page, because we're about to show up at the starting line and like, maybe you did something that you shouldn't have last night, but I also deserve that black eye. So like, we all kind of fucked up and we all kind of need to get back with each other. It always struck me as a beautiful thing. And seeing this and recognizing it's like how you got these 19-year-olds together in 1943, randomly selected, they go to war, and then insist on seeing each other almost till the day they die. I have to imagine there was a degree of that they somehow overcame and got past for the sake of Ahab.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I don't think most of them saw a lot of action. It was still being away from home for a long period of time and not knowing, like, looking over your shoulder, for lack of a better term, if there was going to be, you were going to get shot at or another boat.
You're part of the war machine.
Yeah, one way or another.
There's a risk
even if you
there.
weren't in a trench or anything like that, it was still that stress or whatever. I can't even imagine, right? And most people can at this point. Because, looking back on it, 2 years later, you're like, I was fine. Right. I should have just relaxed. But like when you're 20 and on the boat in the middle of the Atlantic, you don't know if a submarine's going to hit you or something. Right, exactly. Yeah. But yeah, and so with Ahab, we were talking about books and things. I don't read as much as I should, but books like Tipping Points by Malcolm Gladwell, or even Matthew McConaughey's more recent book, the Green Lights book, and things like that. Where let me
get this right. Matthew McConaughey, sexy Southern swagger with the long hair. He wrote a book.
Oh yeah.
Okay, I had no idea he was an author.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Well, when I read it, it wasn't more like it. I mean, there's little pockets of wisdom in it and things, but it's sort of the mentality that I do with Ahab, where I just sort of go with it. Like this morning, I woke up at 4:30 because I'm all out of sync with being from the East Coast, things like that. And I'm like, just start heading. It was a 2-hour drive to that diner, and if I didn't leave that half an hour early, I wouldn't have met those two people. The the veterans group would have left because they were on their way out towards when we met them and things like that. But I guess I could reference, I'll reference Harry Potter.
Yeah, or The Curious Case of Benjamin Button.
Yeah, but it was like that. It's like that liquid luck potion that he takes,
Felix.
right? And it's just not that he knows why, but it's just like, nope.
It's the place to be.
Yeah, it's time to go here. Or don't go back to bed. Get up.
Yeah.
Like let's start now. And I feel like half the battle's just it always is just showing up or just going somewhere, especially with Ahab. And though I may have not kept that core group, and like everybody wants to get to the 50th anniversary of something, whether it's work or relationship, friendships, whatever it is. Like that core group from the beginning, some of them are still around. Like my roommate from college, when I got this, and he was the first one to see Ahab, and he's like, "What the hell is going on here?" When we, showed back up at college. But it's one of those things where I may have lost some of those core people, or they might not get the 50-year pin or whatever imaginary award there is. But I've met so many strangers that are now closer to me than ever. Like a crew member of Ahab's, Ari, she's coming from Austin, Texas to come up to the brewery event at Payette. She's just like, haven't seen you in a while. I've wanted to go to Boise for a while, just like making excuses to be like, let's just do it. And we have other, Russ is coming down. He lives in Idaho Falls, but he saw one of the posts and he always just randomly shows up to things. Like he was at the Red Bull Flu Tag and he wasn't part of our team when we did it. I mean, he was around us and everything, but he wasn't part of it. He just was like, yeah, I'll go to that, or I'll, and he put the Jolly Roger on and just showed up, and he's doing the same thing for the brewery 10 years later. It's just, people still have that camaraderie piece with Ahab where they're like, if he's going to do this, and not that there's any heavy lifting to do with why we're in Boise this time, but people are just, they hear him calling, and it's time to get on the ship and come do the work and come take that adventure.
People want a cause. That's... I mean, obviously this has representation in really odd places in our culture and community at this point, because the causes people are jumping on, to my mind, it's like, okay, I understand you think this is like a good thing. People are people, but having something like this, it's so clear without any of this virtue signaling, let's say, without any external benefit, right? Where we're like, oh, I'm going to post a picture of me with this Ahab thing, and like people give me kudos and snaps for being such a great person. Mm-hmm. It's like, no, but it matters to you, right? It matters to people. And that's what people really want. I think that's, again, a big draw to some of the larger odd social causes that I see these days. But again, people want to be part of something, and having an understanding of, like this represented something for a lot of people. And by the way, it could represent that for you too. It just costs you something. Mm-hmm. Like that's the point. You want to be part of this, you can, but the value to you is also proportional to the commitment and effort you put into it.
Exactly.
Because if it's just like you happen to be there, then it didn't cost you anything. It was meaningless, right? I was talking to a friend at Jiu-Jitsu the other day about. He was like, why can't this just be easy? I was like, because you wouldn't give a shit if it was easy. Right. Nobody would care. The only reason you show up at 6 a.m. is because it's ungodly hard. And there's some part of you that's looking for something that's hard, that's worth your time. That's it. That's the only reason. And even if you tried to make it easy, you'd be taking out one of the most fundamental aspects of it. And there's nothing you can do, by the way, to make it easy. Like there's no simplifying this. You just have to go day, on month, on year, on decade, mm-hmm. and then eventually you get better at it. And this white belt this morning was like, can't you just tell me like what you do with your hand or something? Like, I could tell you, it's not going to make any sense to you,
right?
And it won't matter. But again, it's having something to put effort behind that eventually gets people to appreciate it. And the absence of that commitment and effort and sacrifice, Ahab would be meaningless.
Yeah, and I think going back on something we were talking about earlier, it's about having hobbies. Like this is my life hobby. I never think of it as a job or, sort of feast or famine. Sometimes before COVID, we were doing speaking engagements all over the place, and then between COVID and culture, things have changed, and it's been less about that lately. But it's always been a hobby. I wasn't like, oh, I'm not speaking at as many schools as I was, so I just got to stop. It doesn't always have to be that capitalism model where it's like last year or this year has to be better than last year in terms of some scale. It's just,
yeah, right.
You just have to keep showing up.
Right.
And that's most of it, honestly. Whether you're putting this month, I can put in, 5 minutes today, 3 hours this weekend, and it gets like 10 hours a month. And next month I can do 40 hours. It doesn't mean the last month was garbage. It's the total pool of the amount of time, right? It's that 10,000 hours to get to that mastery, right, or how much you have to practice, right? It's just...
Yeah, plus, like, what do you really need? I mean, how many people do you need to impact? Right? Like, you talk to one person and that changes their life. That's pretty good, man. Right? And most people won't even do that. Like, how much... I think it's such a joy kill to kind of consider, like, oh, well, I only met with, like, accidentally a veterans group and, like, 3 dozen people at a diner. Right. It's not like the 5,000 students I talked to, who, by the way, probably didn't appreciate it at all. Right? But it's so funny that, like, the people that write curriculum for high schools value books like The Scarlet Letter. Mm-hmm. But nobody really cares. Like, the 16-year-olds don't genuinely care about it. Because, like, yeah, look, there's single moms everywhere. Like, culture has moved on. And, obviously the old adage, education is wasted on the young.
Right. But even in the, like, Mr. Holland's Opus, right? I mean, where it's like...
I was in band.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
But that rarely happens where over the course of your educational career, you impact that many, right? Usually a teacher impacts 1 or 2 over their whole career. And it's the same thing with Ahab. You know how many people I've met that, we've met thousands and thousands and thousands of people. There's a very small core group, and then there's the ones on social media that, they keep in touch and keep informed in things, and do what they can, but it's just there's only a very 1% of what you're doing, or 0.1%, is going to be the ones you affect, right?
Right.
Or you're going to fail 100 times and succeed once, but if you don't use those experiences or use it, just consider it more practice for that mastery, then
right,
you're a doomed cause no matter how much time you put in.
Right, because it has to sustain you.
Yeah, you have to have passion behind it, right? It can't just be you're showing up because you were told to, or that's what you're supposed to do.
Right, but you as a person, like, you have this obligation, and you would never, I assume you would never want this to become this frustrating kind of jaded experience where you're kind of like, why don't people show up for this? Like, why aren't I gaining more of a following, or why aren't more people putting in the effort, or this person always hits me up on social media, I'm only 2 hours away, why isn't he coming, or something like that.
Yeah. And we've had engagements that 4 people were at and 1,200, and it was this sort of the same outcome. So it's
right. How many people are you going to talk to in the 1,200?
Right.
Like, you're probably going to buddy up with like 3 or 4 people in the corner anyway.
Right.
Enjoy your beverage.
Yeah. But it is, and what we were talking about earlier, I can't remember if we were on or not, but it's that burden of it, right? Like, no matter, I love carrying him around. Don't get me, if you recorded me the whole time, I'm sure you would not see a happy face. Like, when we were going up Kilimanjaro, I was questioning every step, like, why am I doing this? I'm going to kill myself, things like that. But then afterwards, just like any task, you can sort of see yourself completing it.
Right.
Or it's going to be done, because think about all the things you've done before. Or like the first time you take a trip somewhere, or the first time you fly, it might be nerve-wracking or exciting, or, a little of both. But then the second time you fly, it's a little better and you're more comfortable. And then all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, I don't even experience it the same way I used to, right? And it's so far in the past, you've grown so much that you don't even feel those growing pains anymore for certain tasks, and you're that much stronger, right?
Right. I was talking to my hippie sister today. She's really granola. She's really hairy, very, very sneaky. Lives, she came out of the woods a couple years back and got a house. So that's good. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so I was speaking with her today, and she studied women's studies in the early 90s and has never really let that go. It's a little difficult for me to talk to her. For instance, she was talking about how her husband now works for an insurance company or a hospital or something where he has to essentially assess when emergency room people call or police officers call, they're like, hey, look, I think I have somebody who's like crazy 5150 and we'd like to get them evaluated by this mental health. So he has to determine if they are indeed meet the legal requirements for that, which is essentially like hurting themselves or hurting other people. But if you just have somebody flipping out who's like screaming in the middle of the street, it's like, well, if they're not hurting themselves or hurting other people, we can't really do anything. And she instantly goes into this whole sideline about how this is a really important rule because men back in the day, before this was the rule, if they weren't getting what they wanted from their wives, would just commit them to these insane asylums, and then the women would never be seen again. So there was always this threat of insanity or insane asylum imprisonment that women had to like balance. And it's like, okay, that's terrible. I'm not saying that never happened. That's fine. But like, I don't think that's the whole, but like, how is it that that's the first example you went to? I mean, maybe we just shouldn't imprison anyone who doesn't, in an asylum or otherwise, that doesn't deserve, men as well, right? Because I don't think all the insane asylums prior to this rule were filled with only women who didn't get along with their husbands, right? Like let's just slow it down a little bit. Anyway, so I'm chatting with her and she's a very alternative person. And we started very oddly talking about, she's getting older. She's in her mid 50s. And she started talking about, worrying about being taken care of in her older age. And she said, well, you don't have to worry about that because, you got kids. And I was like, well, I worry about death, not because I'm worried about who's going to take care of me on my way to die. I worry about being able to fulfill my obligation to my children once I've passed, which I won't be able to physically do. Like, I'm worried about taking care of my duty, not who's taking care of me. Mm-hmm. And it was such an interesting thing because I realized that she has spent this time in her life, a large portion of her life. She married late, decided to not have kids earlier on, very much concerned about herself and wanting to only be concerned about herself. And in doing so, really passed up a lot of the more traditional passed down wisdom or devalued kind of passing wisdom on to, like I have something to teach my son and my son should have something to teach his son. And like, we need to keep this going because we think we have something to add to the world. And it was such an odd thing. And here I'm coming to talk to you about this piece of experience in life that has been passed down to you, and you're doing your damnedest to continue sharing this experience and what it means and pass that down to people as well. It's like, God, what planet is she from? It just seems so crazy to me.
Yeah, and with this, like I said, there was 34 of us between all the families, a dozen or so kids. It could have gone to any of them. I mean, the birthday and that significance, I think, gravitated them early on towards a plan to, they constructed this years before I was my 19th birthday, their last year with Ahab, I'm sure. I don't think it was at a whim that night over the, Buffalo Trace whiskey that they always drink. It was more, it could have went to anybody, or there was a lot of us and only I'm doing it. And it's the same way, like, I'm hoping I'm not doing this. I'm setting Ahab up to not dry rot on a lawn somewhere eventually, because somebody else has to do it. This is an ongoing story. That's the best part about this hobby to me, is that I know I can't finish what I'm starting. And a lot of people just squeeze the life out of controlling a situation or what's going to happen in things. And most of the time, the whole world is it's organized chaos. Right. And you have to be able to dance through it. And
you're not the center. You're this brief glimpse in this broader picture there. It's like, I'm here for a blip and then I'm gone, and it's not all about me. And it's like, we're riding the iceberg.
Yeah. Well, even today at Payette, we were doing a little promo shoot for, them promoting the beer and all that stuff. And they were like, oh, you got to be in some of these pictures. And Ahab is my photo double or whatever, my stand-in. Like, I never am in the pictures because just the way you said, it's not about me. It's about him. Like, there's always going to be a different caretaker or storyteller. Like, I am not a permanent fixture in this story. I'm lucky enough to be able to narrate it, and it's growing and things, but just thinking about those men weren't traveling around and saying, hey, look at what we're doing, and saying, go to the website and see the 10,000 pictures that they didn't take, that I have at this point and things, right? They were just doing it to make themselves whole. They knew that no matter what, there was only so many people that have had those experiences like they had and shared those, and there was only one way to cure that sort of void that was brought about by whatever would trigger them during the course of that year.
Right.
Like my grandfather, he was either super quiet or he had his fist out the window yelling at a driver type of thing, and those were his two extremes. He wasn't a chatty person like me. Like I've said more probably in this interview than I would hear from him in a year type of thing. He's very quiet as he taught things even. But I'm hoping that whoever takes this on next, I have plenty of nieces and nephews that aren't blood related to me. I consider, like I said, strangers can turn into family. The hypothesis is definitely true. And there's plenty of another generation coming up that are slowly, they're not brainwashed like I was. I was encouraged to dress like a pirate and things like that as a kid. I have dozens of pictures.
That's awesome.
But I do every time some of my closer friends, and I hope I haven't skipped anybody, but I send them like onesies with the Jolly Roger on it and things like that. So they just have a picture chain because, believe it or not, like my grandfather and his war buddies didn't have cameras in their pocket taking a picture of everything they were doing. It was only word of mouth the way I heard these experiences, whether they were war stories, adventure stories, whatever they were. And I'm sure I'm big fishing some of the memories they told me, and I'm sure they exaggerated a little bit.
Right.
But the best part about carrying Ahab around, and I probably said the best part about it and said 8 different things already, but the fact that when I'm telling the story, I don't have to exaggerate it, because there is no exaggerating summoning Kilimanjaro with him on my back. Like there's no exaggerating skydiving or whitewater rafting or going to a contemporary art museum or a comic convention or anything like that. I'm a better person because I'm well-rounded, because it's what somebody else wants to do and they add it to his bucket list. And then I am the one that has to bring him there. So I'm just evolving, because I never would have went to a comic. Well, I probably would have. I played video games and sports and everything.
Yeah, right.
We all had a little bit of everything, but it's the fact that I have to go to these different things, experience different things, see other people's hobbies, interact, and people tell me what they're passionate about when I'm talking about what I do with my passion project here, or the passion project that I acquired that's beyond different than what I'm sure they fathomed it would be. Like if they were still around and somebody asked them like, oh, what's Ahab doing now? They wouldn't have said, oh yeah, they didn't pass them to me and say, in the next 20 years, please take them up one of the 7 summits, or take them across kiss the Blarney Stone, whatever it is, right? It was about the family they built and how they always got back together, and what we started about talking in the beginning. And now I've just gotten to elaborate on it. Like social media in the beginning was great and it connected people and things, but now we are more disconnected than ever. And I know it's easy to say more than ever about everything, right? But there's got to be a point where we start realizing you can't do 80 different things and do them well. And you have to start choosing things for long term. It can't just be like, oh, let's hang out this weekend for an hour and consider that hanging out. It's barely enough to ask how somebody's doing.
Right.
Even before we started the podcast, we had, 90 minutes of us just, we barely know each other, and we went through the marathon of almost every subject you could possibly think of, right? So it's just, you need to invest more time, and not into rewatching your favorite show or whatever it is. Like there's always a rainy day to watch something and things, but people have to start making excuses to do the things that they've been putting off, because the days go by slow, but the years go by fast.
Right.
And we all know this now. We're all, right. I wouldn't say I'm getting up there, but Ahab does feel heavier every year. And my partner would joke that I add a pound or two to him every year, and when I describe him.
Yeah,
but,
right.
You know,
he's 90 pounds.
Right.
Yeah, my dad a few years back started having some health stuff, and he started getting older, and I didn't know at the time what was going on with him. He didn't tell me, but he knew there were some health things going on, and he started doing these bike trips across the world. So he was going to like Singapore or Vietnam or Bali and just riding all around. And it was the excuse that you're talking about. He had an excuse like, listen, I don't know if I'm going to make it. And he didn't tell anyone. He wasn't interested in talking about it. He was like, but I'm going to do this thing because life is the excuse, because I may not have life, in the future. And he certainly won't. We all won't in the future long enough. But that was his thing. And he's fine. Like, my dad's okay. He's still getting older, so he's marching there. But it's something that he's emphasized a ton. He's like, you're going to have to, he's talking to me, he's like, you're going to have to find a way to do the things that you keep putting off. And it was a big wake up call for him. He was in his mid 50s, and man, I'm still in my early 40s, so I got some more excuses to make.
Yeah.
Anyway, Geeg, listen to me. I appreciate you. You've been driving like crazy. I'm excited for Friday. Beer's coming out in Payette Brewery, yeah?
Yep.
Fantastic. You guys were talking about, and that's the beer can over there, you guys were talking earlier about taking the cans to various places and taking pictures with them, as in like mini Ahab stand-ins. I think that's the most gangster idea ever. Like, if you could get all of Idaho, like little clips of all of Idaho with Ahab in them, I think that would be wonderful.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know I'm fucking crazy. Like, he's 43 pounds. I know everybody can't do this, and I'm not asking everybody to, but it's just about, your grandmother could have left you a silver spoon set or something,
right,
and it's just in a display case, and it's like, okay, I'm going to pass that on to my kid, but it's only to look at. It's not to experience or whatever, but you could take that out and bring it somewhere, right?
Right.
So there's been many iterations of mini Ahabs to try to, at first they were for core crew members just to do their part while they were somewhere else and things, and many versions of them. But yeah, in the beer can through Payette, their motto, butchering it a little bit, I'm sure, but it's like achievements, it like tastes better with an achievement.
Yeah, right.
Right. And you see through all of the things that they post and what they're about, like, people drink their beers with activities and with experiences and things. And so, yeah, with the can, it does have, that we tried to fit Ahab's image on the side of it and everything. So it is like a mini version. Like, you can bring it somewhere. You can, no matter where you are, you have a little icebreaker. If you don't have a way to start a conversation, you can use our story through talking about, hey, have you heard about this lunatic that brings this this humongous thing around the world, right? And it just starts those small conversations. Right. And honestly, to quote a friend of mine, Justin, we've always talked about we wanted to make a bourbon at one point, but it was always going to be courage for the second step. Or, one of those things where it's at the brewery, there's going to be a bucket list wall and all this stuff where people can write stuff down. And if it takes you drinking a beer or two to commit to something that that you're going to regret saying the next day, but you wrote it down and you're going to do it. Right. Like, if you need that liquid courage, this is it in a way. And it's just a fun experience. It just happens to be our 21st year in this partnership between Ahab and I. And of course, it'll be 21 years in July. So, just like anything else, we're having it a little early, but 21 years seems like a good year to have the pirate grog created.
Awesome. I can't wait to try it. It's going to be great. Well, listen, I'm going to let you go. Thank you for making the time for this. I know it was a lot. You've driven, I think, 35 hours in the last couple of days. So God bless you, sir. You're the best. Ahab, I don't know what to say, man. But so again, Payette has the beer. They'll have it on cans and on tap for some time, correct?
Yeah, so it's not a forever thing with them. Hopefully, this is such a good experience that we make it a long-term partnership. But yeah, so this will probably be it'll be distributed. It'll probably be in wherever they distribute through July, August, something like that, and it's on tap in the brewery and other places around Boise until it's gone.
The summer Ahab. That's good. Well, listen, thank you, sir. I appreciate you, and we're going to make this happen.
All right, cheers.
All right. Quick shout out to our sponsor, C Squared Social. C Squared Social is the leading expert in social media marketing and creative marketing. They have fantastic platforms. I have been a client of theirs for some time. I cannot recommend them highly enough. C Squared Social for all of your social media and creative marketing needs.
Can you stay